Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30, Living Room, Local Time, 1000 hours. Emma. Quest for the ever-blooming blossom, T-minus 3 days, 3 hours and counting. Exo-reality contact deadline, T-minus 16 days, 7 hours and counting. I stood there, shoulder to shoulder with Thalman and Thacia, the former staring with a restrained sort of excitement, whilst the latter maintained what I was quickly referring to as her eagle eyes, a look of analytical intensity that would have burned straight through the wealth cube if given the chance.
Am I supposed to be impressed by this collection of shiny, fanciful scrap, Earth-Realmer?
Eleanor quickly chimed in, tutting as he did so, all the while turning his nose up at the proverbial beating heart of the motorcycle. What currently amounted to a hefty box of a motor, a string of chains, and a whole host of accessory parts organised so perfectly that armoury chiefs far and wide would have been forced to shed a prideful tear. I don't blame you if the progress so far hasn't been exciting, I responded bluntly. However, I think your tune will be irrevocably changed once the frame's printed out, I added with a grin, moving over to manually place all the disparate elements of the drivetrain and motor into the assembler, where it now remained dormant until the printer finished with its next big project. One that required the shoveling in of quite a few fair ingots from the wealth cube into its material induction port. You'll start to see it really coming into its own tomorrow, I proclaimed, grabbing the designated ingots highlighted on my HUD as I did so, before turning around to lock eyes with a Venerian who seemed adamant on admonishing everything, save for the elephant in the room. One which Thalman was quick to point out.
We are currently witnessing what is, in effect, the construction of an entire conveyance, he announced, as he moved forward closer towards the rumbling printer. A mannerless conveyance, capable of beastless locomotion, a feat only seen from Nexian designs and long-standing innovations.
Yes, and?
Eleanor shot back provocatively. We are seeing this happen in the comfort of our own room, Eleanor, Thacia quickly added, her eyes not once disengaging from the machinery in front of her. We are seeing the work of Wainwrights and enchanters, the craft of mages and artificers, completed within a mere box. The cogs began to turn in Eleanor's head, as he slowly came to grapple with a realization both Thalman and Thacia had long since come to terms with.
We are witnessing a logistical wonder,
Thalman surmised. The Venerian's features softened, then twisted, before simply reverting to what I could only describe as his theatrical grin.
For an adjacent realm, you mean?
He chuffed back, having somehow reversed gears on those cranial cogs of his.
Excuse me?
Thalman retorted.
This is only a logistical wonder, for those yet to have made space and distance itself trivial. Ergo, wonder is only reserved for those who have yet to have conquered distance itself.
The Venerian chided, with a lackadaisical laugh.
Need I remind you, Prince Thalman, that the Nexus is capable of bridging spaces so seamlessly that the reach of even the most niche of Crownland's manufactorums extends far beyond the limitations of mere physical distance. Anything, from stagecoaches and buggies to fineries and even foodstuffs, all within an arm's reach should the need for it arise. As a result, your sense of wonder and awe stems not from the inherent capabilities of this box, but instead from your limited scope of reference.
Eleanor took a few steps forward, matching up against the Lupinor.
To a commoner, the power of a mage is akin to the impossible made manifest. To an adjacent realm, the capabilities of the Nexus will be akin to nothing short of the inconceivable made trivial.
And to the Nexus, both the volume and adaptability of Earthrealm's industrial innovation would cause even the most industrious of manufactorums to cry out in heart-stricken awe. I chimed in, cutting the Venerian off and attempting to knock him off his high horse before his ego inflated any further. I admit the literal death of the logistical chain as a result of instantaneous portaling is a feat that more or less cements Nexian primacy within your sphere of influence, I continued, reigniting Eleanor's ego, if only for a moment. However, let's not kid ourselves, Eleanor. We're both masters of our own disciplines. We've both tackled and taken advantage of the rules our respective natures provide us with. So how about we call it even today and tone it down with the grandstanding?
I am merely trying to reframe Thalmon's perspective on your box, Emma Booker.
Eleanor shot back.
To, as you phrased it, tone down his admiration of your mannerless constructs.
Produce me a box of Nexium make, one which can autonomously conjure up a monotreader, and then we'll discuss toning things down, Eleanor.
Thalmon chimed in, moving to stand beside me, as he tag-teamed flawlessly off of my own points.
You're missing the point, Havenbrockian. It is because we can be anywhere, at any time we wish, that we lack the need for such toys.
And has Earthrealm not demonstrated that they've reached the same ends simply by choosing an alternate path? Thacia quickly added, wrapping the conversation up in a neat bow. Lacking instantaneous portals to connect their territories, they've not only formed intricate webs of transit, but have built artifices capable of producing what they need in places they cannot reach. The Venerian paused for a moment, the cogs in his head once more turning, before once more reaching some sort of an epiphany. His eyes narrowed, side-eyeing me, before turning away entirely with crossed arms.
If the sheer sluggish pace of that box is of any indication as to Earthrealm's attempts at matching the Nexus's instantaneous bridging, then I highly doubt we've reached parity in that regard, he justified, once more worming his way out of truly admitting defeat. There's always the hologram, Eleanor, I offered with a fangy grin. I am sure we can see plenty of examples of Earthrealm's industrial might if we simply...
As much as I would love for another sightseer adventure, I believe it might be prudent if we focus instead on the preparations necessary for the quest.
Thalmon interrupted, wearing the same disappointed visage I did, his ears drooping ever so slightly. Yeah, you're right, I admitted. There's more than a handful of things I need to get done with the bike, not to mention some back-and-forth errands I might need to do with Sorosar.
That amidst the usual suspects of packing, and perhaps some sparring, eh? Thalmon offered with a grin. Since we will be partners on this adventure, I believe it would be wise if we started sharing martial practices.
Forging what would technically be the first joint exercise across dimensions and species? You don't need to ask me twice, Thalmon. I'm in. I grinned widely, realizing I just made another first in the long line of firsts that I was probably racking up without even knowing. That'll definitely look good on my resume, I quickly added with a chuckle.
Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 19, Residence 20, Living Room, Local Time 10:20 hours. Oris Ping. I assume you are all well rested and well fed. I began slowly, emphasizing each and every syllable as I did so.
Yes, Lord Ping.
Everyone responded in unison, prompting me to nod silently in acknowledgement. Then, let us pray. There was no strict requirement in the worship of the eternal truths. If anything, it was the will of His Eternal Majesty for mortal kind to be unshackled from the burden of worship, especially the worship of the false and unworthy gods that had previously reigned with an iron fist. However, one couldn't help but to see the divine in a being whose eternal wisdom had resulted in the glory of Status Eternia. Moreover, what better being to worship than one who had never claimed the mantle of worship to begin with? His ascension was born not of a thirst for power, nor natural compulsion, I began, as I gripped the hands of the donor and Lorsi tightly, but of love, compassion, and above all else, a selfless call to duty. It was this humility, this modesty before the throne, which drew my heartfelt love to a being whose aims were both righteous and selfless, the preservation of both the sanctity of sapience and the freedom of mortal fates. It was through his sacrifices that we live, I continued in earnest. It was through his sacrifices that we breathe. It was through his sacrifices that we eat. And it was only through his sacrifices that we now drink, dance, love, and bask in the freedom from malicious gods. His Eternal Majesty had put his life, his very soul, within the cusp of oblivion, for the sake of the innumerable faceless masses which he owed nothing to. Once a normal man, made immortal not by the worship of false idols, but instead by the worship of one's own principles. Freedom, dignity, nobility, and fraternity amongst mortal kind. I breathed out, sensing the weakening grip of Lorce's hands, a feebleness which hinted at the man's lack of discipline and faith. From a realm that merely enjoyed the fruits of his eternal sacrifices, without once taking the time to return the minimum of what is owed. We pray not to any lofty idols or uncaring gods, but to a being amidst our own flesh and blood, a being who has earned our faith, our love, and our eternal gratitude and undying devotion. I paused, allowing for silence to take hold, then turned slowly towards the newly opened eyes of Ladona, Lorsi, and Siata. For his majesty is eternal, I declared alone. Then together we answered, a voice resonant in unison echoing throughout the room. His eternal majesty is divine. I felt a wave of steady resolve washing over me, following that. Indeed, I felt a calmness taking over where there was once only frustration and anger. Steady your struggle, son, and allow faith to guide you. The love of His Eternal Majesty is not only divine, but therapeutic for one's discordant soul. Take the time to pray before entering into discussions with your fellows, and allow anger to dissipate into calmer waters. I breathed in steadily, locking eyes with each and every member of my fellowship that had come to sit before me. It was time to enter discussions. Lady Ladona, I began with a loud huff.
Yes, Lord Ping?
I find myself at odds with yesterday's travails. I paused, garnering a stoic visage hiding a wary constitution beneath those piercing red and amber eyes. On one hand, I wish to honor you for your strategic politicking. I raised an open-palmed hand. But on the other... I raised my other hand, before forcing it into a firm fist. I wish to elucidate the hierarchy of things to you. The Anura Realmer's antenna shuddered at this, prompting me to continue. Yet, you of all people should understand the natural order of things, I offered kindly. So, please, enlighten me as to the details behind your unbidden arrangements.
It was a simple reciprocal offer, Lord Ping.
The Anura Realmer responded bluntly, yet as her kind tended to do, she'd wrapped each word up in a healthy coat of honeyed nectar.
I was approached by Lord Asila, the man promising and immediately delivering on said promises, becoming the scapegoat in your stead.
A scapegoat? For what, precisely? I pushed the colourful creature into a corner, her honeysuckle words no longer able to carry the weight of the underlying crux behind this entire debacle. However, instead of the expected words coming from her segmented mandibles, I was instead met by the abrupt and impetuous babblings of the Servin Roamer.
For what, Lord Ping? Why? Your potential failure, of course.
I felt my ire growing, my eyes coming to meet the antlered man whose features quickly dove into the same pathetic, fear-ridden one he'd worn time and time again. However, instead of directly addressing the man just yet, I maintained my focus on Ladona, cocking my head as I did so. Is this true? The Anura Realmer flashed Vicini a stern glance, one that bore into his frightful visage before addressing me with a wary yet respectful expression.
I admit I was apprehensive of your potential loss, Lord Ping, but I only accepted Lord Etholin's offer on the basis of our potential gains, because I believe this would help shift public opinion in your favour.
Oh? I cocked my head at this unexpected development. Do tell.
Lord Asila has just made you a sort of martyr, Lord Ping, a prospective class sovereign who defends all those under his reign, even the ungrateful and impudent. Your integrity is intact, if not even more secure by this action. Indeed. Even if I considered your defeat to be a relative possibility, I was more driven by this new and novel gain, rather than the potential for your defeat.
She spoke softly, kindly, and most of all, sincerely. A bright candle amidst the pessimistic dark. I paused, turning towards Vicini, who had now sunken even deeper into his deservedly sullen darkness. I appreciate the enterprising approach, Lady Ladona.
The pleasure is all mine, Lord Ping.
However, I interjected, or rather halted the Anura before she could continue further. Barring my indisposition or absence, I would prefer that you limit this enterprising spirit unless explicitly commanded otherwise. I stood up, towering over the cross-legged Ladona. Understood?
Yes, Lord Ping.
Good, I nodded, placing a hand behind the Anura antenna, caressing it softly. Now, on to more pertinent affairs. I moved swiftly, turning towards Vicini Lorsi, who currently found it more preferable to stare out into the distant outlands through the great many windows within our room. I will need to appoint a partner for this quest, and what better partner than one who needs redemption? I took a few steps towards Vicini, the man craning his head up as my shadow enveloped his form. Lord Vicini Lorsi, it would be your honor to travel with me as companion, and more so, as a sort of retainer. It was that latter word that prompted the man to shift, his features growing into both frustration and indignancy. Yet that frustration would go nowhere, as he seemed poised to stand, but immediately relented following a stern glare.
But why me, Lord Ping? I would have assumed that you'd pick me.
Lady Ladona interjected, her voice carrying with it a feeling of incredulity born of rejection. I would have loved nothing more than to have appointed you, Lady Ladona, I began, craning my head around to meet her stunning form. However, I cannot allow matters at the Academy to remain unaddressed in my absence. Therefore, I find myself at odds with my personal desires, and the desires of practicality. Lady Ladona, you are the only person I can trust to act on my behalf, to continue my plans, and to act as regent in my bid for class sovereign in my absence. These explanations slowly chipped away at the Anura incredulous features, until all that was left was the same reluctant acceptance that was mirrored on my own visage.
I understand, Lord Ping,
she acknowledged, steadying herself as she met my gaze with a renewed confidence.
It would be an honor to act in your stead.
Good, I smiled. I'm glad we see eye to eye, Lady Ladona. There will be a great many matters to attend to, including but not limited to the potential course for recompense at what will be a vastly understrengthened peer group. I found my smile growing to a grin, as Lady Ladona was quick to grasp my meaning. The new Roma and the mercenary prince are both leaving for the quest, aren't they?
Judging by the errant conversations of the halls, yes, it would seem so, Lord Ping.
Very well. Let us see how Lord Relaria's troop acts in the absence of their golem frowel and mercenary brute, I proclaimed, crossing my arms as I did so before shifting to face the serving Roma. Now, Lord Lorsi, let us discuss how your druidic heritage may be of use on this adventure. Yes?
But perhaps over a spot of tea in town, Lord Ping,
he countered reluctantly.
I assure you, I am no retainer, but I know of a few places where we might find some.
Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30, Living Room, Local Time 1400 hours. Emma.
Wait. I spoke in rapid succession, raising my hands as I did so. You're telling me that the reason why we haven't seen anyone else prepping as hard as we are is because they're all
spoiled brats, gallivanting through town with the express purpose of expediting the quest by ostensibly circumventing it.
Thalman interrupted, with a firm and unflinching resolve, one bordering on contempt.
We, on the other hand, have no such need to turn this quest into a coddled tour. Coddled? If you ask me, I would liken these services to that of a more refined experience for the discerning noble, Prince Salmon,
Eleanor interrupted, though his words did little more than to garner a side-eye from the Lupanor.
Fortunately, I didn't ask for your opinion, Eleanor,
he responded, in as deadpan a tone as was possible. That response sent the deluxe kobold into a set of incredulous harumps, ending in him crossing his arms and simply raising his snout at the prince's response.
These industrious commoners and their noble sponsors have simply fulfilled an understandable need left in the wake of such a laborious affair. Retainers for hire is all they are. A retinue of tour guides and chaperones meant to shuttle those with the desire and the means from one destination to the next. No fuss, no muss, and no adventure involved,
the Venerian once again countered.
And therein lies the problem, Eleanor. This is supposed to be a quest, one with reverence to the first adjacent roamer who successfully achieved the impossible with nothing more than the sweat of his brow and his force of will. And yet now, there are entirely all-inclusive services which take everything out of questing. Services bordering on the absurd, turning this adventure into a holiday.
Wait. I raised a hand, signaling for a timeout. Is that why certain groups, like Synthesis, seem actually excited to go? I don't mean to be rude, but they don't seem the type to really prefer adventuring, judging by their performance during PE class.
Yes,
Thalman acknowledged.
This is akin to a vacation for them. A luxurious holiday in which they can abscond scholarly and majorly responsibilities at the Academy for a stress-free, thoughtless excursion, courtesy of the many, many enterprising establishments down in Elisir.
I can't decide how to feel about this one, I managed out with a dry chuckle. But I guess at the end of the day, the absurdity is just too funny not to laugh at.
To be fair,
Eleanor chimed in, raising a finger as he did so,
you aren't exactly innocent from such blame either.
This bold claim prompted Thalman to once again shoot the Venerian a tired glare, only for the deluxe kobold to once again scoff it off.
The both of you are just as much shirking your academics and responsibilities for your own ends as these would be holidaymakers. And while I admit that your goals aren't as trivial as leisure, they are just as valid as slight against the true calling for the quest of the ever-blooming blossom.
In any case, Thacia finally re-entered the conversation, having finished yet another in her stack of books. I do have a concern I wish to raise with you, Emma. Yes? We discussed the matter of your food situation previously. However, I cannot help but to raise the same concerns for this journey. Without the aid of your tent, will you truly have enough supplies to cover the near week away from the Academy? Yeah, I have enough NutriPaste tubes to cover it, I beamed out. And the rest of your supplies? I'll be packing light this time around. The motorcycle is specifically designed to lug around my fuel repair kits, as well as several spare recharge packs, so we're honestly good to go on that front. I gestured just behind me, towards the hefty roll-up packs nestled neatly within their vacuum-sealed, padded duffel bags. Eleanor breathed out loudly, garnering my passive attention. What is it now, Eleanor?
I would offer my aid, but perhaps the Earthrealmer would prefer to keep to this primitive storage medium.
I didn't respond. Not verbally, anyways. Simply waiting for the blue thing to tucker himself out.
We started today by discussing our mastery over distances, yes? He continued.
Yeah, what about it?
Well, our mastery over space and distances also extends to the distance within spaces.
I blinked at that, cocking my head as I did so.
Enough with the riddles, Venerian,
Thalman butted in, with an increasingly wary sigh.
We know where you're going with this, so just be done with it.
Bags of holding, Cadet Emmabuka. Perhaps you have heard of them?
I found myself pausing for just a moment, as the implications of this revelation quickly manifested itself in an untempered explosion of imagination. Though, honestly, I probably would have tackled the concept way earlier, if it weren't for the constant misadventures we were cycling through. Yeah, I have, I nodded. I should have expected this earlier given your bigger on the inside magic when it comes to both rooms and carriages, but...
But what, Earthrealmer? Are you perhaps in shock? In awe? Incapable of grasping such a notion?
No, not really. You've already demonstrated the concept with your purse. I pointed at the Venerian's hidden pouch. So, you're a bit late to the game with that reveal, I'm afraid. This answer almost immediately deflated the rapidly ballooning Venerian. However, perhaps against my better judgment, I decided to humour him this time around. We did have a lot of empty free time in between prep work after all, and any intel was still good intel. Especially dimension-defined shenanigans like bags of holding. So how exactly do they work? I'm assuming there's some pocket dimension shenanigans going on or something, right? That single question seemed to be enough to reignite a fire within the Venerian's eyes, as his tacitly neutral expression soon turned into an all-out shit-eating grin.
Oh, Froma, sometimes your imagination does roam too far,
he chuckled, placing a hand over his mouth as he did so.
Bags of holding aren't simply connected to some void of our creation. Don't be silly. That's how it worked in the past, but not in the modern day.
I blinked rapidly at that, cocking my head as I did so. So, I was right. What changed?
No interruptions.
I stared at the man with an expressionless gaze. The helmet at least managed to capture that one emotion well enough.
Ahem. As I was saying, that was how bags of holding were made at one point in time. Each and every one was a pocket dimension of sorts. However, owing to the nature of these creations, they had a tendency to collapse on a whim.
The man paused for dramatic effect.
You can imagine that having your repository of valuables disappearing every so often isn't exactly conducive to its function.
Yeah, I can imagine. I paused, as a silly, almost comical thought hit me like a sack of bricks. Or more specifically, a question that would have been more fitting to bring up in a Castles and Wyverns session. One which had been hotly debated from the very inception of the game, and had lingered for as long as the genre had existed, according to digital archaeologists. A part of me hesitated to bring it up, given how ludicrous it was. But what better time to actually address it than with the most reliable source there was? Eleanor, what exactly happens when you put a bag of holding inside another bag of holding? The Venerian, understandably, looked to me as if I was insane. However, instead of dismissing the question, the deluxe kobold actually took it seriously, his tone of voice lowering to one of dramatic wariness.
You surprise me, Froma, with your bouts of unorthodox inquisitiveness,
the Venerian began, before outright addressing the question.
Certain mages, artificers, and enchanters alike have asked that question many times throughout history. Indeed, even the odd noble and wealthy adventurer had tried their hand at answering this question in ways that were foolish at best.
He paused, before conjuring an illusion in front of us, one that seemed to resemble a solid sphere of light that eventually collapsed in on itself, turning into just darkness.
This was the result, the evisceration of space itself.
Both Thalmin and Thacia seemed to finally be drawn in at this, as both focused their gaze on that jet black orb hovering above Eleanor's hand.
Thankfully, the Nexus regenerates what is lost. The results of such catastrophic reactions in an adjacent realm, however, would more than likely be apocalyptic.
I dropped whatever it was I was doing at that precise moment, as alarm bells and klaxons rang loudly in my head. This had escalated quickly. No. It had gone from casual banter to absolutely unhinged at light speed. Evie? Yes, Cadet Booker. Put a pin on this. No, put a massive fucking marker on this one. We gotta perform a category risk assessment later. It's probably a moot point on Earth with the lack of mana, but still. If this is real, then we've got another one for the Category 10 threat catalogue. Acknowledged. I didn't know how to respond to this, but I at least had to try. All of this? From frickin' bags of holding? I exclaimed loudly.
Indeed, Cadet Booker,
Eleanor responded, without even second-guessing himself.
The road to perfection is riddled with the unfortunate demise of those that paved the way.
He paused, smirking snarkily in my direction.
That is something we have in common, wouldn't you say?
I didn't respond, as I attempted to grapple with the scale of destruction involved. So, Are we talking about castles disappearing? Towns? Cities?
It ranges. Controlled cases meant explicitly for study reported voids the size of rooms. The worst cases were when arrogant fools tried their hands at measly study, resulting in entire cities becoming voided. Though there are rumours that even entire regions were subjected to such fates. However, those are more than likely gross exaggerations by the uneducated.
I let out a deep breath, only for the Venerian to latch on and de-escalate things.
That is why we no longer utilize pocket dimensions for bags of holding. Instead, each bag of holding is now bound to a vault, operated by one of the many banks registered under the Crown Lands. The size of your vault depends on the coin you pay for both the privilege of the space and the service.
So that's where your gold is then, huh?
Indeed, Cadet Imabuka. Indeed.
Right, okay. And these vaults are located exactly where?
I couldn't say, even if I wished to.
Eleanor shrugged.
However, once banking became a proper standard, it became clear that there was no need for traditional bags of holding. For not only were they dangerous, but they were likewise artisanal pieces that were produced irregularly. Moreover, considering the Nexus's infinitely expanding nature, we're not exactly pressed for space. So storage is as infinite as the banks are willing to expand.
Right. I nodded once more, letting out yet another deep sigh as I did so.
Well, if you're all quite finished with this history lesson, I'm just about ready to head out, Emma,
Thalman announced, pulling me out of my reverie, as he returned having changed back into his princely attire.
A week of wearing nothing but that elven tunic was driving me absolutely mad.
Yeah, this is one of those times where I'm actually grateful for the armor. I chuckled.
Speaking of the armor, I don't imagine you wish to try your hand at sparring with that over there, do you?
Thalman quickly pointed at the lone and almost neglected Wand Armor Interface device. I was actually meaning to finally get that installed and calibrated, I noted, walking over to grab what was ostensibly just a sensible on a rod. Yeah, actually, let's do just that. So, where were you thinking of sparring, Prince Havenbrock? Readying Wade Interface. Standing by for user installation.